For the better part of 10 years, they haven't been able to get along. Now they've been invited to Cairo, a delegation made up of rival Palestinian factions. Hamas and Fatah, all meeting to achieve what President Mahmoud Abbas has called one law, one weapon, under one authority. The talks on Tuesday are the latest in a series of meetings aimed at ending a deadly division. And so far they seem to be working. Last month, Hamas agreed to hand over control of the Gaza Strip's border crossing with Egypt. It's now being run by the Palestinian Authority, led by Fatah, for the first time in a decade. It's a historic agreement that's already improved the lives of many Palestinians.
I have been waiting for this day when I can cross the border and go to an eye specialist, because here in Gaza we don't have the treatment needed for my eyes. I ask from God and the government to keep the crossing open so I can go to receive my treatment and come back home to my family and my home.
Tens of thousands of people hope peace between Hamas and Fatah will turn around years of having to endure a low standard of living.
I hope that the siege will finish, so there will be job opportunities for people and they will be able to support their families.
But the next phase of talks between Hamas and Fatah might not be so straightforward. Control over Hamas's security forces has been one of the trickiest issues facing the two sides. The suggestion by those brokering the talks is the creation of a National Security Council where Hamas and the Palestinian Authority will have equal representation. It would be monitored by Egyptian officials who would cast the deciding vote in the case of a tie. But on the ground, some are sceptical whether that idea will actually work.
It's impossible. How can I do security when there is all these rockets and guns and whatever? Is this possible? It doesn't work.
Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank have been ruled separately since fighting between Hamas and Fatah broke out in 2007, after Fatah lost control in elections. Back then, the two sides had agreed to form a coalition, but Hamas seized Gaza by force and set up a rival government, leaving Fatah and the Palestinian Authority running parts of the West Bank not under Israeli control. That continued until 2014, when a deal was reached but never properly implemented. So could this meeting in Cairo mean reconciliation at last? Can those representing many different political agendas finally come together and define one kind of future, all in time for a December the 1st deadline? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Ramallah by Abdullah Abdullah. He's the head of the political committee of the Palestinian Legislative Council. In London, we have Sharif Nashashibi. He's a Palestinian journalist and commentator on Arab affairs. And also from London, we have Azam Tamimi. He's an author of several books on Hamas. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Abdullah, let me begin with you first, sir, in Ramallah. We've seen this movie before. It's ended in a false dawn every time the two came together for reconciliation talks. Why should we believe that it's going to work this time around?
It's different.
Why?
Different on three accounts. Number one, the challenges that the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people are facing from both the occupiers of our land, the Israelis, and some attempts from the international community, basically United States of America, who is trying to find a solution, but we don't believe that solution will be fair and will meet the minimum of the requirements of our people. So in the face of all these challenges, we need to be one, strong, united, and solid in our defending our national rights. Second, I think the situation in Gaza miserable, especially at the daily life of the Palestinians, due to the siege that was forced on our people there by the Israeli occupiers of our land. And this, of course, requires all forces of Palestine should come together and try to at least lessen the hardships, the suffering of our people there. Thirdly, I believe Egypt is more keen, more forceful in coming back to its leading role in the Arab politics and its special attention, special ties to the Palestine question. Egypt is determined to succeed this time in unifying the Palestinian forces.
I remember when speaking with Hamas in Gaza a few months ago, they were hesitant to criticize Egypt because they felt the Egyptians are going to play a crucial role moving forward with negotiations. Azam Tamimi, do you share the optimism of Abdullah that the two sides can finally reconcile this time around?
I'm not sure I am optimistic about all of this. Events in the whole region are so fluid. They change by the minute. And the reasons for reconciliation a month ago are probably different from reasons that people talk about today because of the decision by Saudi Arabia to rush toward making peace with Israel. I think so many things will change. But nevertheless, the main motivation from Hamas' point of view is actually easing the suffering of the people of Gaza. The people of Gaza for more than 10 years have been punished so severely by Israel, by Egypt, and by the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah for having made a choice that the world community at the time did not favor, and because Hamas did not succumb to the quartet conditions. But now Hamas realizes that the people of Gaza cannot take it anymore. Hamas itself is suffering a lot because of the siege and the destruction of the tunnels, the cutting of power, supply, etc. So I think that is really the main motivation from Hamas' point of view.
Okay, let's bring in Sharif Nashashibi. Sharif, speaking to many young Palestinians, they'll tell me, okay, on the one hand, you have one side that believes in resistance no matter what, and they're too extreme for us. And on the other side, you have a group of old politicians who are committed to negotiations and concessions no matter what, and they're too corrupt for us, and we're caught in between the two. Is that how it plays out? Are Palestinians doomed to being caught in the middle of these two forever and ever?
Well, yes, unfortunately, you have these two parties trying to reconcile, but they have very different views, not just on Palestinian governments, but on the self-determination cause. And I haven't seen any evidence yet that they are able to find common ground over these major issues of contention, many of which have been kind of left further down the line, probably in the knowledge that they could scupper these talks very easily. So you have big divergences between the two parties, but also you have the reconciliation process is open to influence from outside parties, some of which don't want Palestinian reconciliation. So you have internal and external challenges, which all in all make young Palestinians not particularly optimistic. We've certainly had false starts over the last 10 years, and I don't see yet that this will be any different.
Right. Azam Tamimi, as we drill down into the details, it's one thing Hamas saying, okay, we need to be pragmatic and maybe give up control of Gaza because our people are going to suffer and die. It's another thing to say, okay, we want a unity government. What if being a part of that unity government means Hamas has to then blink, has to cave in, has to, for example, recognize Israel based on the 67 borders? Is that a reality? Is that something we're going to see going forward?
Well, that's a concern people have. So far, I don't see a sign of Hamas caving in this way, although it has caved in some other ways, in giving control over certain issues in Gaza. But recognizing Israel's legitimacy, I don't think we will see this. And if Hamas were to do this, so what's the difference between Hamas and Fatah?
Right.
The Palestinians will be looking for something new afterwards. Because the very sad thing about the Palestinian issue is that their original nationalist movement, their national liberation movement, decided to give up the struggle for the liberation of the whole of Palestine. But this is a dream that every Palestinian cherishes, and Palestinians will continue to tell their children and grandchildren that Israel is a colonial project, an illegitimate entity, and one day we will have all of Palestine freed again.
Abdullah, tell me how this would work. Can you tell me honestly that you could see Mahmoud Abbas, for example, in charge of the Qassam brigades? Is that going to play out in reality?
First of all, let me point out that I am not satisfied. I do not accept your characterization of the Palestinian sides as one for resistance, the other for caving in or succumbing to the Israeli dictate. That's not true.
No, fair enough. I was summing up what a lot of young Palestinians have told me. So this is based on about 13 years of scooping up opinion.
Well, 13 or 10 or 50 or 70 or 100. The Palestinian leadership, still the defender of the Palestinian national rights, its movement, its activities, its struggle by all means to regain our national rights and to end the Israeli occupation of our land. It doesn't mean that if we do not practice armed struggle openly as we did in the early 30 years of our movement, doesn't mean that we condemned or we abandoned that. But rather, we choose the most appropriate way of struggling, of fighting for our rights and challenging the occupiers of our land. And we never stop that. We will never stop it. It's our sacred right to choose what is good for our people and for our future. That's one. And about, of course, if we were to go back to where we should be as one united force, Palestinian force, of course, the leader of that movement, the leader of that state, which we have to say that we are recognized as a state, that must be in charge of everything. Of course, we have divided three different powers: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. But after all, the head of our country, the head of our government, he will be in charge of all the powers that serve the regain of our rights.
Okay, Sharif, you want to come in, Sharif?
I do. Look, Abdullah, with all due respect here, you know, we can legitimately debate the efficacy of armed struggle in this particular situation, but the Palestinian Authority continues to coordinate on security issues with Israel, the occupying power. And I mean, I worry that you underestimate how angry this makes Palestinians, particularly younger generations, where they see that the Palestinian Authority is basically a subcontractor of the occupation. It's one thing to say, well, armed struggle won't achieve our goals, but to actually cooperate with the occupying power, this causes a great deal of anger. And I think that the Palestinian Authority and the older elites need to be aware of how much anger this raises. And this is one of those major issues that could easily scupper the deal, because for the last 10 years, much of the security coordination has been targeted at Hamas. So what happens now, if you have a reconciliation agreement, what happens with that security coordination? How does it affect Palestinians on the ground? You cannot ignore that reality.
Abdullah, you want to come back?
Yes. Listen, don't forget that we are still under occupation. We never claim that we are free, as some might. Then, in this case, there were some conditions as an outcome of the Oslo Agreement, which we tried to get rid of. But in the meantime, that didn't stop us from following the Israelis everywhere, from the International Criminal Court in The Hague to the United Nations Security Council to other fora, that we try to establish ourselves on the international scene and make sure that the countries who are recognizing Palestine as a state, it came because of a continued struggle on the part of the Palestinians. And the BDS campaign is another way of fighting the Israelis. You cannot ignore these facts.
I'm not ignoring them, but you cannot tell me that security coordination, look, that clearly benefits Israel. I have yet to see any benefit to the Palestinians of the Palestinian Authority coordinating with their occupying power. This is BDS and all that. That's all well and true, but there are no benefits to the Palestinians.
Certainly. And there are many Palestinians who believe that coordinating with the occupation enforces the occupation. I'm going to park that aside for the moment. I want to kind of go back to Cairo now with Azam Tamimi in London. The talks taking place in Cairo. The major whopper from the outside is going, if these talks are so important and if this is finally going to be the moment of unity, where's Abbas? Where's Ismail Haniyeh? Where are the two main leaders? Why aren't they at the talks? Is that a fair question?
Well, it's really, I don't know the answer to this question. I can only guess that these are the guys in Cairo are discussing technical issues. Probably the top leaders will come for the actual crowning of the agreement if it is ever reached.
How would you like the agreement to unfold? What would you like to be in the text for you to say, okay, here's a good deal that can lead to a viable Palestinian state? Azam?
Well, what I like, I don't think we will see. But at first, I'd like to see the suffering of the people of Gaza come to an end. That humanitarian catastrophe has actually derailed the struggle of our people. Now, for Hamas even, the focus has become Gaza only, which is very wrong. And I've criticized the Hamas leaders for having been absorbed so much by the catastrophe in Gaza. But I don't blame them. I mean, when your children cannot have access to medical care, when you don't have clean water, when you don't have electricity, when you cannot leave this open prison, life is really miserable.
Abdullah, would you like to see fresh elections after an agreement, once there's a unity government? Yeah?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, democracy was one of the cornerstones of our political life in the Palestinian national movement since its inception. And the division, really, it's held back our practicing this right. And the minute we reconcile, I think the first step is, and it is under discussion in Cairo these days, or these hours probably, it is holding elections, both presidential and parliamentary, in order to go back to the people, and the people will decide who will lead them in the next phase of our struggle.
Okay, Sharif Nashashibi, very finally, the UN's Middle East envoy saying that reconciliation talks must succeed, warning that failure will most likely result in another devastating conflict. That's Nikolai Mladinov. Is he saying something that makes sense, or is he maybe just exaggerating to encourage the two sides?
Well, it is stating the obvious to say that you know, these reconciliation talks must succeed, but that's different from whether they will succeed. And I brought up the issue earlier of external challenges. We've just talked now about Palestinian elections and about Gaza. Now, both of those things are not in the hands of the Palestinians themselves. The blockade of Gaza is up to Israel and Egypt. It's not in the Palestinians' hand. And Palestinian elections can be easily scuppered by Israel, which is the occupying power. It has meddled in elections before. It has said that it will not deal with any government that includes Hamas. So Israel holds the cards in terms of Palestinians being able to campaign and cast votes, and Israel and Egypt hold the cards in terms of lifting the blockade of Gaza. Whether the Palestinians reconcile or not will not necessarily fix those problems.
Okay, we'll be watching those talks closely in Egypt, looking for an announcement, and hopefully anything that comes out of it will ease the suffering of the people, particularly those under blockade. It's been good to talk to all of you, Abdullah, Sharif Nashashibi and Azam Tamimi. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.